It was a quiet evening in the town's small train station, the kind of place where time seemed to move a little slower. The floor was clean but worn, the lights flickered softly above, and the sound of footsteps echoed in the still air. A few people sat scattered on the benches, waiting for their trains, scrolling through their phones or sipping coffee from paper cups. Outside, rain had just stopped, leaving behind the smell of wet concrete and earth. In one corner of the station stood an old upright piano. Its wooden surface was scratched, and a few of its keys were slightly chipped. Most people never noticed it anymore. Some children would tap on it for fun, but no one had really played it in years. It was more like a forgotten piece of furniture than an instrument now. That night, however, something unusual was about to happen. The train from the north had just arrived, and passengers began stepping off, pulling their luggage behind them. Among them was a woman who looked tired but calm. She was dressed simply, wearing a faded coat and carrying a worn backpack that had clearly been with her for a long time. There was nothing fancy about her, yet there was something quietly graceful in the way she moved, as if she carried a story the world had never heard. She found a seat near the corner where the piano stood. For a few minutes she just sat there looking around the station. Her eyes drifted toward the piano, and she watched it the way someone might look at an old friend they hadn't seen in years. She smiled faintly, but there was a kind of sadness in it too. A small boy sitting with his mother nearby noticed her looking at the piano. "Can you play?" he asked suddenly, loud enough for others to hear. His mother hushed him quickly, embarrassed, but the woman just smiled gently and shook her head at first. The boy didn't look away. "Please," he said with that innocent tone only children have. The woman hesitated. For a few moments she seemed to be lost in thought, like she was weighing something inside her. Then, without saying a word, she stood up, walked slowly toward the piano, and placed her backpack down beside it. The sound of her footsteps echoed across the station floor. Some people turned to look. Others continued reading or scrolling on their phones. No one expected much. She didn't look like a performer. No fancy clothes, no confident air. She just looked like someone passing through. She lifted the piano cover carefully, revealing the keys that had gathered a thin layer of dust. She brushed them gently with her sleeve and sat down on the worn stool. Her hands rested lightly on the keys, but she didn't start playing yet. Instead, she took a slow breath as if she was remembering something far away. The boy who had asked her to play watched with wide eyes. His mother tried to pull him back, but he refused to move. Then the first note came. It was soft, almost like a whisper, but it filled the station instantly. The sound was gentle yet clear, and it carried something that made people pause. A few heads turned. The man at the ticket counter stopped stamping tickets for a moment and looked over. The melody began to grow, one note flowing into another like ripples in calm water. It wasn't a song anyone recognized. It wasn't from a famous composer or a movie. It was something different, something deeply personal. Each note seemed to tell a story, one that didn't need words. The music started slowly, delicate and careful, like someone trying to find their way through old memories. Then it began to build, becoming stronger, warmer, filled with emotion. Her hands moved with grace, not in a showy way but with quiet confidence, as if the piano understood her completely. Soon the entire station grew still. The usual noise, the hum of vending machines, the clicking of shoes, the announcements over the speakers, all faded into the background. Even people who were about to leave stopped in their tracks. The music seemed to hold everyone in its spell. An older man sitting near the exit closed his newspaper and turned fully toward her. A young couple stopped arguing and listened. A woman holding a cup of coffee forgot it was getting cold. The woman at the piano looked calm, but her eyes were full of emotion. There was something almost heartbreaking about the way she played, like she was letting go of pain that had been locked inside her for too long. Every chord carried weight. Every pause felt intentional, filled with meaning. Someone whispered, "Who is she?" But no one had an answer. For several minutes, the world seemed to stop moving. The melody changed again, shifting from sadness to hope, then to something even deeper. A quiet strength that seemed to touch everyone who heard it. It was the kind of music that didn't just sound beautiful. It felt human. It reminded people of things they'd forgotten. Love, loss, forgiveness, the small moments that make life real. A teenage girl who had been scrolling through her phone without interest now had tears in her eyes. A businessman who looked impatient moments ago stood frozen, briefcase in hand, his face softening. Even the security guard near the gate leaned against the wall, listening quietly. It was like the music was reaching into each person's life and speaking directly to them. The woman never once looked up from the piano. Her fingers kept moving, her shoulders relaxed, her expression peaceful. She seemed completely lost in the sound. It wasn't a performance for applause. It was something else. It was as if she was remembering, healing, and sharing that healing with everyone around her. Minutes passed. Then 10, then 15. Yet no one grew restless. They didn't want it to end. Finally, the melody began to slow. The notes softened again, almost like a lullaby now. The crowd, which had grown larger without anyone noticing, leaned in closer. People stood near the ticket booth on the stairs, even outside the doors, just to listen. The train announcements came and went, but no one moved. And then the final note came, a single, trembling sound that hung in the air for a long moment before fading away. The woman kept her hands on the keys for a few seconds after the music stopped. The silence that followed felt heavier than the sound itself. You could almost hear the collective breath of everyone in the station. Then slowly she lifted her hands, placed them in her lap, and bowed her head. No one clapped right away. It was as if people didn't want to break the spell. Then, quietly at first, someone began to applaud. Another joined. And soon the entire station was filled with the sound of hands coming together. Not the kind of loud applause you hear at a concert, but a warm, grateful one. The woman finally looked up, smiling softly. Her eyes were bright, not with pride, but with peace. She stood, closed the piano lid gently, and nodded toward the little boy who had asked her to play. He grinned, clapping harder than anyone else. She picked up her backpack, slung it over her shoulder, and began walking toward the platform. A man called out, "That was beautiful. What's your name?" But she didn't answer. She just turned slightly, smiled again, and disappeared into the crowd. People stayed there for a long time after she was gone, as if waiting for something more. Some took out their phones and talked excitedly about what they had just seen. A few even tried playing the piano themselves, but the magic wasn't the same. An elderly woman sitting near the exit whispered to herself, "I've heard that song before." But where? Her voice trailed off as she tried to remember. But the memory stayed just out of reach. Outside, the sky had cleared and the moonlight reflected off the wet streets. The sound of trains came and went, and the world slowly returned to normal. But for everyone who had been there that evening, something had changed. They didn't know her name or her story, but they felt they had witnessed something rare, a moment of pure emotion in the middle of an ordinary night. And in that small, forgotten station, the old piano had found its voice again. The next morning, the small town was buzzing with quiet excitement. People couldn't stop talking about what had happened at the train station the night before. The mysterious pianist had become the center of every conversation. The station staff spoke about her as they cleaned the platforms. The man who sold newspapers said she looked like she had seen the world, but carried some heavy story behind her calm eyes. The woman from the coffee shop kept replaying a video someone had recorded on their phone, trying to make sense of the melody that had touched everyone so deeply. No one knew who she was. She hadn't given a name, hadn't stayed for long, and hadn't taken a train that anyone could trace. It was like she had appeared out of thin air and vanished just as quietly. By midday, the video of her playing began spreading online. It wasn't professional or high quality. It was shaky and full of background noise, but it didn't matter. The emotion in her music was powerful enough to silence any imperfections. People who saw it said it gave them goosebumps. Some even cried without understanding why. But while the world was just discovering her, the woman herself had moved on to another town by the morning. She walked along a quiet street lined with old buildings and small cafes. Her backpack looked heavy, but she carried it like she was used to the weight. She stopped at a small park and sat on a bench watching children play. Their laughter filled the air, and for the first time in a long while she allowed herself to smile. A man nearby was playing the guitar for tips. He wasn't great, but he played with heart. When he took a short break, he noticed her listening and said kindly, "You play too, don't you?" She looked surprised but nodded slightly. "I used to," she replied softly. He chuckled. "You don't just used to. People who really play, they never stop. It stays in them." She didn't answer, but his words stayed with her. Later that afternoon, she found herself walking past another piano, this time inside a small community center. A sign on the wall read, "Music for everyone. Open practice area." Through the glass doors, she could see a few people inside. A young boy practicing scales, an old man humming along to a tune, a woman teaching her daughter how to find middle C. The atmosphere was warm, full of life. Something about it drew her in. She stepped inside quietly, her footsteps barely making a sound on the wooden floor. A volunteer at the front desk looked up and smiled. "Are you here to play?" he asked. She hesitated for a moment before answering. "Maybe. Just for a little while." He pointed toward an upright piano near the window. "You're welcome to use that one." She walked over, placed her bag on the floor, and sat down. Her fingers brushed over the keys like she was greeting an old friend again. The piano wasn't perfect. A few notes were slightly out of tune, but she didn't seem to mind. For a while, she just sat there, not playing, just listening to the faint sounds around her, the distant chatter, the creak of the building, the soft hum of life. Then slowly she pressed one key, then another. A simple tune began to form, soft and unhurried. It wasn't the same piece she had played at the station. This one was gentler, almost like a lullaby. People in the room began to notice. The boy stopped his practice, the teacher paused mid-sentence, and the old man turned his head. The melody carried warmth, but underneath it was something fragile, a hint of sadness that made the music feel even more real. It was as if she was telling a story without saying a word. After a few minutes, a small crowd gathered near the piano. No one interrupted. They just stood there, listening, their faces calm and reflective. The music seemed to reach inside everyone and pull at something familiar. Memories, hopes, regrets. When she finished, there was silence again. Not an awkward silence, but one filled with emotion. The volunteer at the desk clapped first, and soon everyone joined in. She smiled, bowing her head slightly, and whispered a quiet, "Thank you." The volunteer came closer. "That was beautiful," he said sincerely. "You should come more often. People here would love to hear you play." She thought for a moment, then nodded. "Maybe I will," she said softly. For the next few days, she did return. Each time she came quietly, played for a while, and left. People began to look forward to her visits. The little boy who practiced scales started sitting near her, trying to follow her fingers. The elderly man brought his harmonica and joined in. The room filled with laughter and music, and it seemed like the whole place came alive when she was there. Yet even though she smiled and interacted kindly with everyone, she remained mysterious. She never spoke much about herself. Whenever someone asked where she learned to play, she would simply say, "From life." One evening, when most people had left, the volunteer, the same man who first greeted her, asked gently, "Your music, it sounds like it comes from somewhere deep. Were you always a pianist?" She looked out the window before answering. "Not always. There was a time I didn't play at all. But there was also a time when music was all I had." He didn't press for more. Something in her tone told him not to. That night, as she walked back to the small room she had rented near the bus station, her thoughts drifted to the past. The music she played now carried pieces of memories, ones she could never forget. There had been a storm once, years ago, a night full of fear and loss, and a promise she had made to never let silence win again. The next day, she arrived at the community center earlier than usual. She began to play even before anyone else had come in. The melody this time was strong and full of emotion. It wasn't sad or gentle. It was powerful, almost like a declaration. The sound filled the empty hall, echoing off the walls. The volunteer walked in quietly, listening from the doorway. He didn't interrupt her, but he could feel something shifting in the air. Her hands moved faster, her eyes closed, and her expression changed. No longer calm, but alive, almost fierce. When she finally stopped, her hands trembled slightly. She took a deep breath and looked up. "Sometimes," she said softly, noticing him there, Music speaks what words can't. He nodded. It really does. That day, she stayed longer than usual. She helped tune one of the older pianos, showed the little boy a few tricks, and played a duet with the old man. Everyone noticed how her mood had lightened, how the music that came from her now carried more hope than sorrow. In the corner of the room, someone recorded a short clip of her playing again. This time, her smile appeared on camera, gentle, genuine, full of warmth. When that clip was uploaded later that evening, it began spreading too. People online started calling her the traveling pianist, but she didn't know that yet. She wasn't playing for fame or attention. She was just playing because it was the only thing that still felt right. That night, she returned to the train station where it had all begun. The same piano was still there, and people had left little notes and flowers beside it. Some notes said, "Thank you for the music," and others simply said, "You gave me hope." She ran her fingers gently over the keys, not to play, but to feel the instrument's cool surface under her hands. She smiled softly. Somewhere inside, she felt a quiet peace she hadn't known in years. She didn't know what her next stop would be or where her music would take her, but one thing was certain. She wasn't just passing through anymore. She was leaving pieces of her soul behind, one melody at a time. And as she looked out at the night sky through the station's glass ceiling, she whispered to herself, "Maybe music really does find you again, when you need it most." Days passed, and the woman's music continued to spread quietly across towns and cities. Wherever she stopped, people remembered her. She never stayed long, sometimes just a few days, sometimes only one night. But she always left behind something that lingered. The way she played made people feel something rare, something they couldn't describe. At the community center, people still talked about her. The little boy who used to practice there now played with new energy, trying to copy her soft hand movements. The volunteer kept the piano polished, hoping she would return, but she didn't. She had already moved on, walking down new roads, carrying her worn backpack and the silent stories she never shared. One afternoon, she arrived in a seaside town. The air was salty, and the waves could be heard even from the small square where she stopped to rest. Fishermen were repairing their nets nearby, and children were playing with shells on the sand. There, too, stood an old piano. This one placed outside under a wooden shelter, protected from the sea wind. A handwritten sign on it said, "Play if your heart wants to." She smiled faintly when she read it. Something about that simple sentence touched her. She placed her backpack down and sat in front of the piano. Her hands hovered over the keys for a long time before she began to play. This time, the music started quietly, like a whisper carried by the ocean breeze. It wasn't the same melody she had played at the train station. It was slower, deeper, and full of longing. People walking by stopped to listen. The sound of waves mixed gently with the tune, making it feel almost magical. An older man sitting nearby listened closely. His face changed slowly from curiosity to surprise, then to recognition. He stood up, his eyes wide, and walked closer. When the woman stopped playing, he spoke softly. "I've heard that melody before." She looked up, her eyes calm but guarded. "Where?" she asked quietly. He hesitated before answering. "Many years ago, during the big storm, the one that flooded the old hospital near the river, there was a woman who played this same piece for the children who were trapped inside. People said she kept them calm for hours, even when everything outside was chaos." He paused, watching her carefully. "Was that you?" She looked away, her gaze fixed on the sea. For a long time, she didn't speak. The man waited patiently, sensing that her silence meant more than words could. Finally, she nodded. "Yes," she said softly. "That was me." He let out a quiet breath. "I knew it. I never forgot that sound. I was one of the rescue volunteers that night. We could hear the music from outside. It gave us strength to keep going." Her eyes glistened slightly, but she smiled faintly. "That night changed everything," she said. "After the storm, I stopped playing for a long time." The man sat down beside her, careful not to intrude. Why? He asked gently. She took a deep breath before answering. Because the people I played for didn't all make it out. I thought maybe I had failed them. The music that was supposed to comfort became a reminder of what I lost. The man nodded slowly. But you didn't fail. You gave peace to people who were afraid. Sometimes that's the only thing we can give. She looked at him then, truly looked at him, and for the first time in years, she felt understood. They talked for a while, about that night, about the town that had since rebuilt, and about how sometimes life carries us far from where we began, only to bring us back again in unexpected ways. When she finally left, the man watched her walk away, his eyes filled with gratitude. He turned back to the sea and whispered, "Thank you for coming back." That night, she found a small room to stay in near the harbor. The sound of the waves outside reminded her of the storm, not in a painful way anymore, but in a peaceful one. She took out a small notebook from her backpack. Inside were pages filled with handwritten music. Some parts were messy, with crossed-out notes and smudged ink. On one page at the top was written, "For those who listened through the storm." She stared at those words for a long time, then slowly began adding new notes to the page. The melody that had once been full of sorrow began to shift. Softer now, gentler, filled with light instead of pain. The next morning, she went back to the same piano by the sea. The sun was just rising, painting the sky pink and gold. A few people were already there, waiting, hoping she would play again. When they saw her approach, smiles spread across their faces. She sat down, opened her notebook, and began to play. The tune that came out was familiar yet new. It carried the same emotion as before, but transformed, no longer heavy with loss, but shining with hope. The crowd listened silently. Even the waves seemed to calm as if they too were listening. When she finished, the same man from before approached again. "That was different," he said softly. "It felt like forgiveness," she nodded. "Maybe it was," she said. "Maybe that's what I needed to find." Word about her spread through the seaside town as quickly as it had in the others. People started leaving small gifts by the piano, flowers, letters, seashells with messages written on them. One note read, "You remind us that even pain can become music." Another said, "You helped me remember my father who played piano too." The woman read them all quietly, touched by the kindness of strangers. But she knew she couldn't stay forever. Her journey wasn't finished yet. A few days later, she packed her bag again. Before she left, she played one last time, a short, joyful piece that sounded like a farewell. The people who had gathered knew it was goodbye, and though they felt sad, they also felt grateful. As she walked toward the bus stop, a little girl ran up to her with a seashell in her hand. "For you," the girl said shyly. "So you don't forget us." The woman knelt, smiling gently. "I won't," she promised. She placed the shell carefully into her pocket and boarded the bus. As the vehicle moved away, she looked out the window. The piano grew smaller in the distance, surrounded by sunlight. That night, as the bus traveled through dark roads, she watched the stars through the window and thought about how far she had come. For so long, she had carried the weight of her past, believing her music had failed. But now she understood something different, that even in pain, beauty could grow. Even loss could turn into a song that healed. When the bus stopped in the next city, she stepped off feeling lighter than before. The streets were crowded and loud, but she didn't mind. Somewhere in that city, she knew there would be another piano waiting, maybe in a park, maybe in a station, maybe in some forgotten corner of the world where people needed to be reminded of hope. As she walked into the bright morning, she whispered quietly to herself, "Music never really dies. It just waits for you to come back to it," and with that, she disappeared into the crowd once again, carrying her music and her quiet strength with her, leaving behind the soft echo of a melody that the sea would remember forever. The city she arrived in was nothing like the quiet towns she had passed through before. It was noisy, crowded, and full of movement. Cars honked, people rushed across streets, and music of all kinds poured out of cafes and open windows. But even in the middle of all that noise, she could feel something missing. That same quiet connection she found when people truly listened. She walked for hours, exploring streets lined with street performers, artists, and vendors. Everywhere she turned, someone was playing music. Guitars, violins, drums, even buckets turned into instruments. Yet none of it felt quite like what she was searching for. Eventually, she came across a small square tucked between two tall buildings. It wasn't a famous spot, just an open space with benches and a few trees. In the middle stood another piano, painted in bright colors with a sign that read, "Anyone can play." A few people were sitting nearby eating lunch. A man played the same short tune over and over, laughing at his own mistakes. Children ran around chasing pigeons. It felt like a small pocket of peace in the middle of the busy city. She sat on one of the benches watching. Her fingers twitched slightly, wanting to play, but she waited. After a few minutes, the man at the piano stood up and walked away. She hesitated for a moment, then slowly walked toward it. When she sat down, the noise of the city seemed to fade just a little. She touched the keys softly, feeling the familiar weight beneath her fingertips. Then she began to play. The melody started gentle, almost like a whisper. It grew slowly, curling through the air like a story being told for the first time. People walking by started to slow down. Some stopped completely. The laughter of children faded. The sound of cars seemed to drift into the background. Her music flowed through the square, warm and alive. It didn't demand attention. It simply drew people in. Some people closed their eyes as they listened. Others recorded on their phones, and a few just stood there, hands in pockets, unable to move. Across the street, a young man who worked at a small coffee shop stepped outside to listen. He felt something stir inside him, a memory maybe, or a feeling he couldn't explain. He quietly took out his phone and began recording. She played for nearly 15 minutes, moving from one emotion to another. Hope, sadness, peace. When she finished, there was a long silence before anyone reacted. Then came applause, soft at first, then louder, spreading through the small crowd that had gathered. She smiled gently, nodded in gratitude, and stood up. As always, she didn't say her name. She picked up her bag, gave one last glance at the piano, and walked away. The young man from the coffee shop uploaded the video that evening. He didn't know her name either, so he titled it simply, "The Unknown Pianist in the City Square." He thought maybe a few friends would see it, but by the next morning, thousands of people had watched it. The comments were filled with emotion. One person wrote, "This made me cry and I don't even know why." Another said, "There's something healing in her music. It feels like she understands pain." And someone else commented, "She's the same woman from that train station video. It has to be." Within a week, the video reached millions of views. News pages began sharing it, calling her the mysterious pianist. People started searching for her everywhere. The woman who appeared out of nowhere, played something that touched every heart, and then disappeared again. But she didn't know any of this. She was already in another town by then, sitting in a park surrounded by trees. She didn't use phones much and rarely stayed anywhere long enough to hear the news. She only knew that every time she played, people listened, really listened, and something inside her felt lighter. It was as if the music had stopped being a burden and had become a gift again. One evening, as she was playing quietly to herself near a riverside bench, an older woman approached. "Are you the pianist from the city?" she asked. The traveler looked up a bit startled. "I'm not sure," she replied softly. The older woman smiled. "I think you are. My granddaughter showed me your video. She listens to it every night before sleeping. It calms her down. She says it feels like someone understands her heart." The pianist didn't know what to say. Her throat tightened and she felt tears forming in her eyes. She managed a small smile and said, "That means more than you know." The older woman squeezed her hand gently. "You've done something special. Don't ever doubt that." After she left, the pianist sat in silence for a long time. The stars began to appear above the river, and the soft sound of water mixed with the wind in the trees. For the first time in years, she didn't feel like she was running from her past anymore. She felt like she was walking toward something good. The next few months became a journey of discovery. Everywhere she went, people recognized her face. They didn't know her name, but they knew her music. Sometimes, when she arrived in a new place, people would already be waiting near pianos hoping she would show up. Some brought flowers. Others brought handwritten notes saying how her music had helped them through hard times, grief, loneliness, fear. One letter read, "I lost my husband last year. Your music helped me breathe again." Another said, I was thinking of giving up on my dreams, but your playing reminded me why I started. Each message touched her deeply. She kept them all, folding them carefully and placing them in her bag. One afternoon, she was invited by a local community center to perform at a small charity concert. At first, she wanted to say no. She had never played on a stage since that storm years ago. The thought of bright lights and a crowd made her heart race. But then she thought of all the people her music had reached, not through fame but through feeling. Maybe it was time to stop hiding. The hall was small, filled mostly with families and locals. The lights were warm, not harsh. She sat on stage, her hands shaking slightly as she faced the audience. The host introduced her simply as the traveling pianist. When she began to play, the nerves disappeared. The melody came from a place beyond fear. It was a new version of the song she had once played during the storm, not as a cry of sorrow, but as a message of hope. The audience sat in complete silence. Many had tears in their eyes, but they were smiling too. When she finished, the applause was long and heartfelt. After the show, a little boy came up to her holding a small drawing of a piano. "This is for you," he said shyly. "When I grow up, I want to play like you." She knelt beside him, her heart full. "You already can," she said softly. "You just have to play what's inside you." That night after the concert, she walked through the quiet streets alone. The sound of her own footsteps echoed softly against the buildings. She felt something she hadn't felt in years, peace. Not because the world suddenly understood her, but because she finally understood herself. Her music had come full circle. What once began as a way to survive her own pain had become a way to heal others. And in doing so, it had healed her too. A week later, she received a letter at the place she was staying. It was from the rescue worker she had met in the seaside town, the one who remembered her from the night of the storm. His letter was short but heartfelt. He wrote, "I saw your video. The world finally knows what I knew that day, that your music carries light. Thank you for not giving up on it." She folded the letter carefully and placed it with the others. Her eyes filled with quiet tears, not of sadness, but of gratitude. The next morning, she returned to the train station where her journey had first begun. The same old piano still stood there, but it looked different now, polished, repaired, and surrounded by flowers and small notes from strangers. On a small plaque fixed above the keys, someone had written, "In honor of the mysterious pianist who reminded us that music can heal even the quietest hearts." She sat down slowly, her hands trembling slightly as they hovered over the keys. Around her, people gathered again. Just like that first night, then she played, and as the sound filled the station once more, everyone could feel it, the peace, the strength, the story that her music carried. It wasn't just a song anymore. It was a masterpiece born from pain, shaped by courage and given freely to the world. And in that moment, she wasn't mysterious anymore. She was simply human, brave, kind, and real. By the time she returned to the small train station, it felt different somehow. The old walls and dusty floors now carried echoes of the countless people who had listened, cried, smiled, and felt something they couldn't explain. The piano had been repaired, polished, and adorned with small flowers, notes, and drawings left by strangers who had been touched by her music. Each offering was a silent thank you, a recognition of the beauty she had shared without asking for anything in return. She walked slowly toward it, feeling a quiet sense of awe. People were already gathering, curious and hopeful. Some had heard stories online, others had been told by friends, and a few were simply drawn by the subtle feeling in the air, a sense that something special was about to happen. The woman sat down on the worn stool, placing her backpack gently on the floor. She rested her hands on the keys, feeling their smooth, familiar surface beneath her fingertips. She closed her eyes for a moment, taking a slow, steady breath. It wasn't fear she felt, nor nervousness. It was anticipation. This time, it wasn't just about playing music. It was about connecting, about leaving a piece of herself for anyone who needed it. She began to play. The first notes were soft, delicate, almost like whispers. People in the station stopped in their tracks, even those who had been rushing to catch trains. Conversations faded, footsteps slowed, and the usual hum of the station seemed to disappear. The melody grew, weaving through the air like a gentle breeze carrying fragments of stories long forgotten. This was no ordinary song. It wasn't something written in a book or taught in a school. It was her story, the moments of fear, sorrow, hope, and courage that had filled her life. Every note spoke of the storm she had survived, the people she had helped, and the hope she carried despite all she had lost. As she played, something extraordinary began to happen. People who had been strangers to one another began to connect. An elderly man held the hand of his wife a little tighter. A young woman wiped a tear from her cheek and smiled at the child beside her. A group of teenagers who had been arguing moments before now sat silently, entranced by the music. Even the security guard at the station, who had seen countless people rush by without a second glance, stood quietly, letting the notes fill him. Her fingers moved faster now, yet every movement was purposeful, controlled and full of meaning. The melody shifted seamlessly from quiet sorrow to bold triumph, from fragile hope to fierce determination. It was as if she were telling everyone that pain was real, but it could be transformed into something beautiful. That even in the darkest moments there could be light. A few people who had recorded her previous performances shared live videos online. Within hours, the clips went viral. But the viewers weren't watching just to see her play. They were listening, feeling, connecting with the raw honesty in her music. Comments poured in, people sharing how her playing had helped them through grief, reminded them of loved ones lost, or given them courage to face challenges they had avoided. Among the crowd in the station, a little boy tugged at his mother's sleeve. "Mom, I feel happy and sad at the same time," he whispered. She smiled, unsure how to explain it. The music had done what words often could not. It had spoken directly to the heart. The woman's eyes remained closed as she played, but she felt the energy around her. She could sense the shared breath, the quiet tears, the smiles, and the stillness that held them together. Each chord, each pause, each note was an invitation, an offering of herself without expectation. When the final note came, it wasn't loud. It was soft, almost fragile. Yet it resonated deeply, echoing through the station long after her hands had left the keys. There was a pause, a suspended silence as if the entire space was holding its breath. Then the applause began. Quiet at first, hesitant, and then stronger, more confident. People clapped, cheered, and some even wept quietly. The woman smiled, standing slowly. She didn't say anything. She didn't need to. The people in the station understood. They had witnessed more than a performance. They had witnessed courage, hope, and the proof that one person could touch countless lives with nothing more than honesty and talent. A young man stepped forward from the crowd, holding a small notebook. "I just want to say thank you," he said quietly. "I've been struggling for months. Your music, it gave me something I thought I'd lost." She nodded gently. "That's all I ever wanted, to remind people that there's still something worth holding on to." The applause continued, and people began leaving little notes, flowers, and even small gifts on top of the piano. Some notes simply said, "Thank you for playing." Others were longer, sharing memories, stories, or just acknowledging the impact she had. One note read, "Your music helped me forgive someone I thought I never could." Another said, "You reminded me why I love life again." She picked up a few of these notes, reading them quietly, tears forming in her eyes. She placed them in her backpack, knowing that they were as much a part of her journey as the music she played. By the evening, the station had emptied, leaving only a few people who lingered, reluctant to leave the feeling behind. She walked to the exit, feeling the weight of the day settle gently on her shoulders. Outside, the sky was painted with the soft colors of twilight. The streets were quiet, the air cool and refreshing. She looked back once at the station, the piano standing proudly in the center, surrounded by flowers and notes. It struck her how much had changed since that first evening when she had sat down at the dusty instrument. Back then she had been uncertain, almost afraid. The piano had been silent, and so had she. But now the music she had shared had traveled farther than she could have imagined. It had touched hearts, inspired strangers, and created a ripple of hope that would continue long after she was gone. In the following weeks, stories about the mysterious pianist spread even further. Local newspapers featured articles about her, and people shared their personal experiences online. But she remained anonymous, never giving interviews, never revealing her name. She didn't play for fame or recognition. She played because the music demanded it, because it was her way of connecting to the world, and because it reminded others that even in ordinary moments, something extraordinary could happen. People began to visit the station just to see the piano. They left flowers, notes, and sometimes coins as a silent tribute. Children learned to play simple tunes there, inspired by the memory of the music that had once filled the space. Families returned, parents telling their children stories about the mysterious woman whose music could make anyone feel seen and understood. The woman herself continued her travels. She went to other towns, small villages, and even quiet parks in cities. Each time she found a piano or an instrument waiting in some forgotten corner. And each time she played, sharing her story, her emotions, and her courage through the universal language of music. But no matter where she went, the train station piano remained special. It had become a symbol, a place where strangers came together united by a memory of her music. It reminded them that one person could make a difference, that kindness and art could reach farther than words.